Joining us to talk a little bit more about the India-Russia relationship over the years and what it means for us in this particular time where we are seeing, of course, our relationship still developing with the Americans as well, is Ambassador Arun Singh, the former ambassador to the United States, as well as Fred Weir, Russian affairs expert from Moscow, who also joins us now. Ambassador Arun Singh, first to you, if we can just talk about our relationship with the Russians, which has, of course, been, very, very steady over the years. It did see a bit of a, a slowdown in between when we're trying to get closer to the US, but it seems we're back on track, and 20 deals to be signed today, of course, the most significant being the S-400.
You, of course, spoke quite a bit on the defense cooperation that has been ongoing between India and Russia, which is an important component of the partnership. But there are other dimensions of the relationship which are also important. For example, in civil nuclear energy, although India has been talking to French companies, US companies, the only entity with which there has been progress in terms of actual construction of nuclear power plants in India has been with Russia. 2 plants in Kudankulam are already functional. For 2 of them, phase 3 and 4 construction has begun. For phase 5 and 6 discussions are ongoing. So civil nuclear power generation has been a very important dimension of cooperation between India and Russia. And also in the oil and gas sector, that there is significant investment by Indian companies in oil and gas exploration, exploitation in Russia, in Sakhalin and in other places. And the Prime Minister, in his own comments that you had played, has referred to almost $18 billion worth of investment by Indian companies in Russia in energy, health and related areas. There was also reference to a major project in terms of LNG supplies from Russia to India. So those are also very, very important areas of cooperation. And where I slightly sort of differ from what you said when you mentioned that things slowed down because India was trying to build relations with the US, it was not really an either-or situation. That there are certain dimensions of India's relations with Russia which are very important, and we described that. But there are other dimensions of relationship with the US which are also important.
Right.
For example, you could look at trade. India's trade with the US is more than $120 billion. And with Russia, it's about $7 or $8 billion.
Right.
If you look at the presence of the diaspora, there are about 30,000 people of Indian origin in Russia, more than 4 million in the United States. So we have to build each relationship on the merits that each provides to maximize India's advantage.
Right.
So I think that is perhaps a more reflective way of assessing.
But Ambassador, I agree with you, Ambassador Arun Singh. But also the fact, sir, that this is we have tried to maintain an equidistance from both the Americans and the Russians. But when you spoke about our trade relations and the diaspora, that seems to be under threat under the new Trump administration. Particularly at length, President Trump has spoken about the trade deficits and how it's in favor of the Americans. So we will have to delve into that sort of fine line in our relationship, and we will talk a little bit more about that. But let me go across to Moscow as well, where we are joined by Fred Weir as well. And what are your thoughts about India's relationship with Russia? Do you feel that it's gone from strength to strength and it can only get better from here?
No, it has had its ups and downs. There's no question about that. But what has changed and is irrevocably changing in the world is that we are coming into a very complex, multipolar world that we haven't seen for a long time. We had a bipolar world during the Cold War, broke down, and there was a unipolar moment in which the United States basically, led the world, tried to reform global institutions in its own image. It really created problems for countries like China and Russia and India who are coming up and want their place in the sun and feel that they should be equal partners. It has been the case that the United States doesn't want equal partners. It wants to be first among equals at best. And so that unipolar moment is over. It clearly is. And now we're into a new situation And it will depend on how all different countries, how wise they are in calibrating their relations with one another. I think this is firstly true about the United States, which seems to have ditched the whole multilateral world order now,
Right.
and is into creating a world where the United States forms its relationships on a bilateral basis with everybody.
Right.
Separate deals with everybody, and also, though, aiming specially at keeping down potential serious competitors.
That's a very important
China.
point. Yes, that's a
Yes.
very important point you're making there, Fred Weir. Ambassador Arun Singh, take that forward. The fact that, Fred over there says that the United States wants to be first among equals, and that's sort of lopsided the relationship among all partners, as well as what we are seeing here, where India wants to keep an equidistance from all other countries, whether it's our relationship with Russia or Iran or otherwise, and and it seems that the Americans are playing spoilsport every now and then.
Look, we have to understand that every country, and not just the United States, every country tries to take decisions based on what it sees to be in its interest. And when the interests do not align, then countries have to maneuver and find ways of having other options. So US, as Fred mentioned, after 1990, found itself, as many people described then, as a hyperpower. It was the only dominant power in the global context. Now situation is changing, partly because there has been the rise of China, economic rise, military rise of China, and China is posing an economic, technological, and a military challenge to the US in East China Sea, South China Sea. You would have seen recently a report of a US military vehicle in the South China Sea being forced to go off course by a Chinese vessel, which challenged its presence. So they are facing that challenge. Similarly, Russia, after having been in some decline after 1990, and between 1990 till about 2000, Russia was focused largely on building a new relationship with the West and ignoring some of its traditional partnership. But after around 2000, when Russia saw that the US, the West, was involved in expansion of NATO to the east, saw Russia more as an adversary rather than a partner, that they started redefining their relationships. So Russia again is trying to strengthen itself, protect its interests, pose a challenge to the West. So there is a new situation.
Right.
And the third that has come in, as Fred mentioned, that the US itself is trying to, in a sense, retrench from the global context and not put so much focus on sustaining the kind of world order it had tried to create with its European partners after the Second World War. It is having difficult relations with Europe, it is having difficult relations with its neighbors, Canada and Mexico. Right. So it is focusing more on what some have described as the narrow interest of about 35 to 40% of the American population, which feels it has lost out from globalization. Right. So we are dealing with a new situation.
Yes. And Fred Weir, the US, of course, didn't spare, China when it came to, the sanctions last month. But can we expect different treatment, Fred? Do you feel that, this relationship is more special for the United States? So even, we could be spared under the CAATSA?
Relationship with India is different, and it is special. There are just so many reasons why India is not a potential competitor in the same sense that China is, or Russia, for that matter. There are so many commonalities between India and the United States, and they are playing out in a lot of ways. So I think we must hope that this rational argument that's being made is true, that India will get a pass and not be treated the way that China is or Russia is in this new American, calculation about how they're going to organize their relations with the world. But I would not count on it. As I said, you've got some very ideologically minded people in the saddle there in Washington. And Donald Trump, though he's a very canny politician and seems to be able to win his battles, he doesn't seem to have a coherent sense of world order or where he wants to go. He's surrounded by people who do, and I don't know if they're leading him, because I don't think he's a personality who can be led, or, he's nobody's puppet. But on the other hand, well, you see the chaos in Washington. There's trench warfare, bureaucratic conflict going on. It's absolutely mad. What the domestic politics of the United States today is just something to make your hair tear out. But how they approach the world, I think, is not as predictable as those calm, rational arguments that people are making. I think that we may expect more chaos and irrationality.
Right. Yeah, that's absolutely right.
I hear that.
Yeah, in fact, we did have some guests yesterday as well from the United States who said that Donald Trump's reactions would totally depend on who in Washington he's really talking to. But Arun Singh, Ambassador Singh, just to take this conversation forward from not just the triangular relationship of the Russians, the Americans, and Indians, but for us, of course, Russia is important not just for defense, but for our critical energy needs as well. Expand on that for us as we look ahead to the press statements.
So it is very important for energy for two reasons. One, as we discussed, Indian companies have made significant investments in energy exploration in Russia, in Sakhalin and other places. And that is very important for India's energy security. And the second has been civil nuclear energy partnership. The only country with which the partnership for production of energy, generation of nuclear power, has progressed while discussions are going on with others has been Russia. And so, and there is already a broad understanding that based on what we have done so far, we are looking at 12 or more nuclear power plants in India being built in cooperation with Russia. So for both these dimensions, partnership with Russia is certainly very, very important for India, going beyond just the defense or space cooperation.
Right, and Ambassador Singh, as I said, as we are looking forward to that press statement, which is of course running late a bit, what are your expectations from this joint statement? There is a big delegation that President Putin has come with, and he is going to have subsequent discussions with business leaders as well. What is your look ahead?
Of course, there will, in this joint statement, will be some emphasis on the bilateral relationship, how it is a valued relationship for both countries, the fact that they've held 19 annual summits so far, and then identifying areas of cooperation in the bilateral relationship in the period ahead. Because, again, as you saw in the Prime Minister's comments that were picked up, he spoke about a business summit that is going to be held. It's a reflection of the fact that while our defense, space, nuclear cooperation are strong, on the civilian economic cooperation, the figures are very low. And that's where business persons from both countries need to come together and find new opportunities for cooperation. So that will certainly be one. There could be references to the global order, to importance of multipolarity, rule of law in international relations, norms being followed, and there could be some reference to the challenge of terrorism, to the situation as it is evolving in Afghanistan, certainly the Middle East, where Russia is playing a very important role in trying to resolve the conflict in and around Syria. So these are certainly areas that are bound to come up.
Right, and Ambassador Singh, it's important that you bring up, of course, the issue of terrorism, and that's something we do try, in our press statements to assert that terrorism seems to be one of the biggest challenges when it comes to South Asia. Fred, do you believe that we can get the Russians to speak about terrorism the way the Indians would want, particularly the fact that, the Russians remain close to the Pakistanis as well, and that certainly becomes a point of contention? Fred?
Yeah, I don't know that the Russians are close to the Pakistanis. I find that Indians perhaps obsess on this a little more than necessary.
Right.
But they have been opening relations with Pakistan, and I think that the Russians have perhaps a different approach to the future in Afghanistan. I think this is what this is about, because sooner or later the handwriting is on the wall. the Americans are going to leave Afghanistan. And everybody is who's left in this region, and that's you Indians, and that's the Russians who have Central Asia right next door to them, are going to feel the consequences. It is definitely important to get on the same page about what to do, whether to hold negotiations with the Taliban, which is what the Russians are doing, and whether to somehow find a way to contain the consequences of what happens when NATO, or the US in the first place, just abandon the place, which is going to happen. Down the road, there's no doubt about it, and the entire American record speaks to this. You know it's going to happen, and this has got to be a critical feature of what Russians and Indians talk about, especially with the security people when they get together and look at the future. It's Central Asia and Afghanistan has got to be at the center of their concern.
Right. In fact, we can see Russian President Putin and Prime Minister Modi actually walking in for that joint press statement, which we were expecting, and a host of issues are expected to be discussed, including terrorism, possibly. Let's in fact watch out for what we can expect in this press statement.